Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide. Hi there, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
You may be glad to know that this episode is about people, but not like the mental health things we were talking about last episode.
No therapy session this time, Cindy?
No personal therapy session. If you all are wondering what people learned about me in the last episode because you didn't listen, go and listen.
Go on back. It's a good one.
Thanks. Thanks very much. But this time we're going to actually talk about the people who work with and teach our young children. And how do we measure their quality? I recently read an article, and it was just one of many, many articles that talks about standardized tests and how that shouldn't be used to evaluate the quality of teachers. And that made me think, you know what? How are we evaluating the quality of the people? We have lots of episodes on this podcast that talk about quality of curriculum, quality of educational approach, quality of interactions. We've talked about all that, but the people themselves, that's something else. So how do we figure that out, especially with our earliest, youngest learners who are like infant through eighth grade, right? How do we figure that out? What does high quality mean? We have in our profession a code of ethical conduct and statement of commitment from the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, NAEYC's Code of Ethical Conduct and Statement and Commitment. You can look that up. So many professionals don't even know that that exists, that it's a little startling. I think we've talked about it in the past and linked it to the website. You can check there, but you can also Google it on your own. It's widely available. And that talks about 4 categories of our obligations to children, our obligations to families, and our obligations to coworkers and the outside community. So I think all of that includes information about what would make a quality person working along with our children, but we would really need to parse it out. And then there are other resources, and I'm just looking at a resource right now that talks about professionalism and professional behavior. And this resource and others talk about things like safety practices. Are you keeping with safety practices? Do you have professional behavior like being respectful of colleagues, doing what's asked of you, what you're responsible for, like submitting lesson plans, doing things in a timely manner, getting things in by due dates, and having reliable attendance, which I know is a big sticking point, especially these days, right? Having reliable attendance and showing up on time and showing up at all. Having positive relationships with parents and colleagues, totally get that. It sometimes talks about your ability to be confidential and not gossip, your demeanor, do you approach things in a positive way? And then sometimes people talk about personal appearance, which I think is a topic for another episode, because I think that's debatable. I think so too. I've worked in places that have dress codes that I think we know better now. So we'll talk about that in the future, and what people do about what they deem to be inappropriate attire and all that. We'll talk about that in the future. But right
I wrote
now,
it down for a future episode.
Like, how do we measure the quality of the person who is sitting with that very young child and starting to form the connections in the child's brain? I don't know. I know that a lot of administrators, principals, directors, they evaluate staff, but I'm not sure how we ensure. I think there's a lack of accountability in the profession. I think that there's a lot of didn't do so well at this bothers me about this person, but we have always been very hesitant to let people go. And especially these days, I think it can be harder to get and retain quality people.
Yeah. And when you're already short-staffed, how are you going to let someone go who might not fit? So it's like,
that's such a hard thing, because there are people who for whatever reason, maybe they gossip too much, maybe they're too negative, maybe it's a way that they speak to families or whatever. There are people who really are just sort of like a poison on a staff, and I know that people feel stuck with them now.
But yeah, because there's not going to be anybody to hire to replace them, and you're already worn thin here, and your staff is worn thin. So if you let someone go, that wears them even thinner, and it's an issue. It is an issue.
It's a huge issue because I think it's not just about, it is about, but it's not just about someone's relationship with coworkers, for example, or showing up on time. It's about the impact that this person has on the children.
Yes.
And I think I understand that people are like, I can't run a program if I have no adults. I just need warm bodies in here. This also, I think we're going to be attributing eventually, when we look back at this time, attributing to some of the impact of the pandemic, is that we had some people in our settings who really were quality professionals doing wonderful things for children. And we have some people who are just not the highest common denominator, but we needed to keep the human being in the program for ratio reasons.
But leaving that, you have no choice, I feel, in some instances, but then leaving that person in your staff could poison your whole staff too. And then depending on what they're doing to the children or with the children, that it's just going to spread. The bad seeds always spread quicker.
Maybe it's the dilemma of, how do we measure quality people? And not only how do we evaluate, is probably a better word than measure. How do we evaluate and seek quality people? But how do we hold them accountable?
Especially when, it used to be like, do this or you're going to get fired kind of thing, right? Do this, you're going to lose your job. And now
when the world was plentiful with people I could replace you with who were qualified.
And now there's people who are like, she's never going to fire me. And so, you're right. In that case, there is like no accountability, because they're in a jam. They have no choice here. So I really don't know if we have the solution here now.
I think in this time that you can hire people who don't have have experience, but you have to look for certain characteristics in those people. And I think that families should also be asking about these characteristics. My advice to people is like, you can, when they say I have to hire people with no experience now, and I'm like, you can hire the people with no experience. We all had no experience at some point in our careers. What you're looking for is someone willing to learn. For me, that is the highest standard for a quality person in the field of early childhood. Not so much, how many years did you spend in the field? Tell me about how you did this. Tell me about how you did that. I think, tell me about your willingness to learn. What lengths are you willing to go to learn these things? How do you adapt to change is a good question for people.
That's my big one. How do you adapt to change? Because some of these people who come in with 30 years of experience and all these degrees and all that aren't willing to change. They're set in their ways, and their ways might not be bad, but if you have a different philosophy than they do, and they're not going to adapt to your school's philosophy, then that could be an issue too. So they look great on paper. They got 30 years of experience and blah, 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 blah. But do they fit in with your school? They might not. Where somebody with no experience, but is willing to learn and adapt and change, that might be a better fit.
I'm somebody who believes that education matters, because I've spent a long time being educated. And I think that my education made a difference in my life, and it continues to. I continue to educate myself.
But that's the difference. You continue to educate yourself. See, I'm one of those too, like a lifelong learner, right? Whereas I'm always wanting to learn new things, especially like in the education world and about children, about anything really. I'm just a lifelong learner. But there's some people who got their education are like done, and they think that that's it. And
I have
yeah.
The minute that somebody feels like I'm done learning, I know everything there is to know, I have always felt like it's time for you to leave the staff.
Yep.
Time for you to get out of working with young children, because just like everything else in our entire world, education evolves, and we have to be willing to evolve
with it. Yes.
We have to be willing to do that. And we have to be willing to learn and grow and admit that we didn't know things. It's not that you're wrong. It's that you didn't know. We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Right. We don't know what we don't know. And when you learn it, but you have to be willing to learn it. So
I think you also, you need to know that there's a couple different ways to do something too. That especially with children, like what your method might not work with this particular child, there's another way to do it. So go learn that method, and then maybe you could be helping the child. But just thinking like, oh, I went to school for this, I already know, my way is the only way, that's not helping the children.
When I think about all the evaluations of staff I've seen, not maybe very, very few of them right at the top say willingness to learn.
I don't know of any do that I've been
I'm thinking about when I was evaluated, when I've given evaluations, and when I've seen the evaluations from my clients, and they talk about specific acts, right? Like, do you show up on time? Do you have good attendance? They'll sometimes say things about dress. Do you get along with other people?
Yeah. Do you have a good rapport with the parents?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Are you handing in lesson plans on time? Are you documenting children's learning? I don't know how many times, it's got to be very few, if any, that I've seen. Are you willing to learn, and how do you handle change?
I don't think I've ever gotten evaluated on that. I don't think that's been a part of anything.
I honestly think that should be the whole evaluation.
I think it should be the whole thing.
Right? I understand commenting on like punctuality. I get that,
but all of those things that you mentioned, the punctuality and the attendance and the respect and all that stuff, could fall under that one question. Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to change? Now, say you're a person that runs late all the time. That's something that you can learn how to be on time, right? There's different methods you can learn to get out of your house on time. Are you always absent? There might be something that you can do to change and adapt so that you're not always absent. Are you respectful? There's always, you could take a class on how to respect your coworkers. There's all of this stuff we're talking about, I feel like falls under that one question.
Yes, I agree.
Yes. So then why is that question not part of evaluations?
I think
it's not measurable. I think that's why maybe.
I think as families begin to tour early childhood programs and settings for their children in the upcoming year, that they should put on their list of questions, and families should walk in with a list of questions. You put on your list of questions, what type of professional development is done here? How often does the teacher that my child works with express a desire to learn? And how is your staff with change?
There you go.
I think we need to be asking those questions, because if we're going to evaluate the quality of the people who work with our young children, personally, I think those are the most important characteristics. When people say, when people just sort of dismiss new information and say, I've been doing it this way for this many years and it's worked. That's, for me, that's just, it's not impressive. It doesn't, I understand you've been doing it for X number of years, but you don't know what you don't know, and you haven't tried what you haven't tried. Right. And, lots of things were done with us for many years that weren't so great.
Yeah.
In all different ways, health and nutrition, exercise, the way that they dealt with our feelings, the way they dealt with our behavior, the way that in so many ways, things have evolved, and we know better now. And that's why when people are like, change is too hard for me. Well, you know what? You need to take a deep breath and take a step.
Right. Or honestly, there's also this, like, change might be really hard right now, but be honest about that. Like, listen, I'm just really stressed right now. We're spread a little thin here, and I just need to concentrate on keeping the kids safe right now. But be honest about that with your director or principal. Like, this is what I need to concentrate on. And when I'm out of this short period of time of change or whatever it might be, then I will work on that, because that shows that you're willing to learn too, but you're also being honest, which I think is good, because there might be a reason why you're not able to make that change right now. And it might be like, listen, I'm just concentrating on this because this is all I can concentrate on right now.
You can also go to people and say, you know what, change is really hard for me. So can we break this down step by step? Can we give me goals, right?
Yeah.
Can we please give me goals to achieve by a certain date that are step by step, because then it won't feel so overwhelming. We can go to people and say, change has always felt overwhelming to me. And that's perfectly fine. But folks, we have to be willing to learn and evolve.
Yes.
So again, going back to the topic of this episode, that is what really makes a high quality early childhood professional. In the Code of Ethical Conduct and Statement of Commitment, there is something that talks about the fact that we are willing to attain new knowledge and implement what's best for children. And it speaks, that's what that speaks to.
Yeah, that's what that speaks to. Yeah.
And it really should be a large part of who we hire, who we keep, and the evaluations. If you have people on the staff and you're thinking, but I can't replace these people, I'm going to advise you. I know how hard it is, and there is no real one great solution right now except this: be proactive. Yeah. I would consistently be putting ads out for new people, because you never know who you'll come across. And then if you come across somebody, great, you can make the change in your staff.
Yeah.
But that's also, we can't just sit paralyzed saying, well, that's not going to work. I'm never going to find anybody. I actually know some really great out there who've been hired in the past 6 months to a year in programs and schools. They've been hired. They've worked out wonderfully. It just takes a little more hunting, I think.
And there's also some really high quality teachers that are looking for jobs because the setting they were in might not be the setting for them, and they're looking for something different. So you never know what's out there and who's out there and what you might find, but you got to be looking. You can't just shut the door and be like, you know what, we're stuck here. You got to be open to it.
We can't just wring our hands and say, well, this is who I got.
This is
it. That's not okay.
Stuck. Yeah, it's not okay. And there's only so much training that you can do. Like, you can train, but if that person's not willing to learn, it's not going to happen. You just spend all that money on training and all that time on training, and that's not going to work. So there's only so much you can do here with the staff that you're given. So make the changes to make the staff that you want,
Okay, so to sum up, we've said you have to be proactive about finding the people you need.
Mm-hmm.
They're out there. You're just going to have to dig harder.
Yeah.
A big measure of quality should be their willingness to learn and change.
Yep.
And there was something else that we just said that I was like, accountability. We're going to have accountability. Again, we're going to have to reinstitute accountability in places that have not, because you've been so afraid, which is, again, perfectly understandable.
It kind of spins full circle, because if they're being proactive, then at any moment, the staff might be like, oh, they put an ad out, you know what I mean? Or they might hire somebody at any moment. It might be me that's on the chopping block. So like, that might put people more on their toes to be willing to learn and change too.
Maybe.
But you got to be proactive. You can't just,
places are short staffed. It would not be weird if the staff saw an ad.
I know.
If you're short staffed.
That's true too.
There are ways to kind of, build upon the situation and use it to your advantage, I guess.
I think
so.
That's true too.
And families, as you start to think about the setting your child is in or maybe joining, you should be asking questions about, they're obligated to do professional development. They're going to tell you, oh, we do 20 hours a year. What are you doing that professional development about? How much change have you seen come about in your program because of which professional development? I want to know that they're taking their learning and implementing it.
Yeah. Ask them, what's something new that you implemented in your program this year?
this year based on a
based on the
professional
trainings
development
that you
session?
took. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That would be
Yep.
a great question.
Great question.
Because if they look at you stymied, I'm going to tell you
Then
what,
they didn't do anything.
They didn't because as a
They're
leader,
doing it to fill out those papers that say we got 20 hours. They're not actually learning anything.
100%. As a leader and as a teacher, I would have been able to tell you what I implemented or what my staff implemented based on what I learned off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Because it's something new to them or new to you. Yeah. So if they hesitate, it means they're not really taking that required number of hours and putting it into practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Or not taking it seriously.
Correct.
They sit there in a room to get the paper signed off and that's it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of quality things, we want to let you know that during the winter break here in the United States, we are still going to be releasing episodes. Because hey, quality podcast. We're not without us. Although some people may want a break, and I totally get it. So if you take that break from the podcast, when you come back, figure out where you left off and start our episodes from there.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you have any feedback for us, any questions for us, anything that you would give us permission even to say while we're on the podcast, or not, whatever, you can contact us.
Yeah.
Go to howpreschoolteachersdoit.com and fill out the contact form or send us a message on Facebook. And admittedly, we get behind in those. Admittedly.
Yeah. But, especially now, it's a little busy.
It's a little bit.
It's a busy time.
Yes, in many ways. But
we do.
Please do it because we will eventually read everything, we promise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you want to give us permission to say anything on the podcast, you have to tell us what we have permission to say, your name, your location, and specifically tell us that we have permission to say it on the podcast. Don't just sign it that way. We won't know if we can say it.
Yeah. Otherwise, we won't do it.
Right. Okay, folks.
Respectful.
We will catch you next time on the podcast.
Bye, peeps.
Bye.